Hello and welcome to another episode of Creative Glue, where we're continuing to explore the common bond that brings creatives together. I'm your host, Scott Robinson, and today I'm chatting with the renowned artist and designer, Pascal Anson. Like many creatives, it's hard to fit Pascal in a box. He's designed everything from a jumbo jet for the 2012 London Olympic Games to delicately embellished butterfly sneakers for New Balance. He's worked with clients including Sony, Aveda, Penguin Random House, Levi, and Marks and Spencer, to name just a few. He's a former senior lecturer in the design at Kingston University and was a guest artist at Hong Kong Design Institute and made his television debut as a mentor on the BBC's The Big Painting Challenge. His book, Ordinary Made Extraordinary, 24 Things to Make Using Everyday Stuff, aptly describes how Pascal likes to do things, challenging audiences to see things in a little and sometimes a lot different light. Alongside his impressive design resume, Pascal is also a passionate advocate for sustainability, a passion he shares with our previous guest on the show, Grace Lamb, and Pascal's longtime friend of 30 years, and the lady who kindly dobbed him in for this guest post. Pascal and Grace actually met through their mutual best friend, Yoko, a Japanese designer who works now at Chanel, and a lifetime friend both professionally and personally. Pascal and Grace have inspired each other through things like sustainable fashion challenges, where fine art, fashion, and sustainability all join forces. Born and bred in South London, Pascal joins us from the other side of the world with two artistic parents and one that you could say were destined for the creative scene, mate. Tell us what exactly does your work involve and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, thank you, Scott. That was a really nice introduction. It brought a little bit of a tear to my eye because my dad actually, both my parents were painters, and my dad, at the end of his life, lived in Australia. So
Oh,
Australia is somewhere
fantastic.
that's really close to my heart for lots of different reasons, professionally, but also family links and friends who are also there. So, as you said, I think I was destined to become an artist or a designer with both parents being creatives. So it wasn't really a battle I had to fight where I was having conversations to try and get them stopping me going into medicine or law or accountancy. So yeah, it was kind of easy for me to stake a claim and become an artist and study art and design. Yeah.
Amazing. And I mean your work of looking through your Instagram pages and your website. I mean it's very diverse from, wooden cars to vacuum chairs and hairy chairs and chandeliers made from sellotape and
Yeah.
like it's a very eclectic mix.
Yeah, recently I've been worried that it's a little bit too broad and too diverse, and maybe we can drill down into that a little bit more later. But I suppose I've never really been attracted to one specific material or one specific process or way of work. It's more applying my creative process to kind of anything. And I think what happens with that is that I end up having quite a broad portfolio, as you said, from sometimes graphics to fashion to automotive design with the aeroplane. There is a common thread, but sometimes I kind of when on a good day when I'm feeling good about my work, I think it's great to have such a breadth of design covering all sorts of different bases. And then other times when I'm feeling less good about it, I think maybe I should become a little bit more of a master just at one aspect of that and become kind of a little bit kind of deeper in one part. But up till now, I've been kind of okay with exploring lots of different options.
It certainly makes for an interesting life, if nothing else.
Yeah, I think I, I I do think the design world seems to be quite kind of split into people that are very kind of niche and very good at one specific thing and breaking out of that lane or going to other areas and diversifying I think is a really good thing. But I think the downside of being very broad with your approach is that people don't know what they're going to expect from you. So it's quite difficult for people to take a risk when they ask you to do something, because it's not like you've done one chair and you're going to get a kind of different version of that chair for another company. So
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of the upside is it's like very creative and broad and like new challenges, and you learn a lot each time you go into a new industry. However, I think the downside of it is it's actually quite difficult to convince people if you've done a wooden car to then do, uh, yeah, a chair or
Yeah.
a product, right? It's quite difficult to make that jump between those two things.
Yeah. I mean, you talked earlier, when you just after the intro, in terms of, there being a common theme despite that broad diversity. Is it your process that's the commonality, or is there something else underlying that becomes this common thread that you bring? Is it process, structure, framework, or is it something much more, you know, interestingly and
No,
dynamic and creative than that?
I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. I think it is a creative process. Process is super important to me from start to finish, and the development of an idea, the research of an idea, and the practical kind of implications of bringing that to life. And I think that process, and that's probably what made me kind of think about Ordinary Made Extraordinary as a book title, which was thinking, well, what is this thread that binds everything together? And I realized that it was that process. And looking at something that many people may overlook, something kind of mundane and quite boring, ordinary, and then trying to do as much as possible with that boring thing, and kind of like pushing things as far apart as possible. So on one hand, you have boring, and on the other hand, you have extraordinary, and like trying to push those things as far apart as possible, because then there's a lot of tension
Yeah.
within the gap.
So, I mean, without giving away the secret source of your methodology, I mean,
Oh no, I'm all about that. Look,
what's
there's no
part of it,
mystery.
I mean, what part how do you go about that? How do you start taking, what is that process to say something so ordinary and find a way to make it extraordinary?
That's a good question, and I think, as I said, I'm all about demystifying art and design. I think there should be kind of no um, access gatekeepers to the world of creativity. Everybody's creative, and I think they shouldn't kind of feel like it's not for them. And I think the
Yeah.
way that I work is not taking something like very rarefied or exclusive. It's just looking around and finding something actually quite ordinary and thinking, well, what possibilities does that thing have? What can I do with it? And the way I like to explain that is through three words, and I think it cuts through most design and definitely my design principle, which is observation, analysis, and opportunity. So observation is just looking around. Analysis is asking the questions, and then opportunity is what creative possibilities do you have with those observations and with the questions that you asked about that thing. And I just think that everybody can apply those principles, or
Yeah.
most people can apply that, and it's kind of fairly simple rule to follow, but might help you if you want to kind of start your creative journey. You can apply that to any type of creative media, but I think it actually starts with those three basic principles.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting that analyze, or that asking the question piece. I mean, in my world, we would put the most amount of weight on our discovery process, and going through and asking those right questions and really eking out what it is that we need in order to do our job. And in the same way, I suppose, for you, finding out what that's going to make that piece, or that artwork, you know, end up extraordinary, happens in that piece of the puzzle.
Look, I think it's just being curious. I think children are naturally super curious, and I've not ever lost that curiosity. I want to know how everything works, why everything is like it is. Not to kind of like to some sort of obsessive point where I can't relax, But I think those that initial curiosity about how things work, why things are the way they are, why things look the way they are, that curiosity is really what drives that middle phase of analysis and asking questions about something.
Fascinating. I've always described myself as the guy that was quite happy to look at the flower and just accept that it grows without having to pull it out and look at the root system. So it's amazing the different creative processes we go through in those things and where that curiosity leads us. Because I think it is
Mm.
an important part of the creative process is that curiosity for sure. So, I mean, in talking to people, I'm curious now myself in how you actually categorize what it is you do or define for people. Because I can imagine when someone, is down the local pub and says, "Hey, Pascal, what do you do, mate?"
Mm.
That could be quite a difficult question to answer with, the
Yeah,
broadness of what you do.
I think also because I I studied as a designer, but I would think that some of the projects that I've worked on are not pure design projects.
Mhm.
And I like exploring that boundary between design and fine art. But of course, you can't have that discussion really down the pub with somebody because what they want to hear is, like when you talk to somebody and they say, "I'm a legal fintech advisor for startups in administrative finance." More and like you don't really know what they do, and you kind of just want to get to the point of like, okay, what do you do? Do you organize data? Do you plan new strategy? Like,
Are
what is
you
it
that
that you
guy
do?
from Suits?
Well, something, and I suppose that I always find I kind of like shudder a bit when I get asked what I do because I find that a reductive answer is kind of what people want. So they want me to say
Yeah.
I'm a designer, but then it's like, are you a fashion designer? Are you a furniture designer? Are you an interior designer? Are you an architect? What is it? And then when I'm just not good at answering that question.
I
And
can
I kind of
imagine.
don't really like that question because I suppose maybe
Horrible.
I'm running from it as well, right? Because I think that goes back to that thing is if I was able to say I'm a graphic designer that works on typefaces for uh, print journals, that's kind of quite a clear title. But just labels, isn't it, and job descriptions and boxes. So
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about it yet.
Yeah. I decided to change my title quite a while ago now to an Imagineer, because I thought if it was good enough for Disney, it was probably
Right.
good enough for me.
Yeah.
'Cause
Okay.
and
How's
then
that
and
going?
then it gets people asking questions because then, it creates more conversation. What do you mean an Imagineer? What do you do every day? It's like so it, helps to create that conversation because 'cause I'm
You know,
probably just as stuck as to what I do.
it's really interesting that you're saying that because I went to a wedding in Vienna at the weekend, and it was my friend Sophie who actually won an Emmy award for *Handmaid's Tale*, where she was the set designer. And
Amazing.
again, I've known her for 30 years, and on our little placemats, not placemats, but the name tags where it was seating had my name, and then on the back it had "Breathing Dreams into Reality." And she's kind of a little bit kind of hippie LA kind of Burning Man scene adjacent. And I thought, oh no, that's the thing that she's been using for like 30 years to describe her work. And that was the first time that I actually thought, well, look, she's an Emmy award winner. That's exactly what she does. Somebody has a vision and she kind of makes it happen and she makes it kind of real and she makes
Yeah.
her dreams real. And I thought that I kind of changed a little bit because I thought initially that was a kind of quite a kind of hippie thing to say, but really that's quite a good description of exactly what she does. And, look her up on Wikipedia. There's a picture of her with her mum sitting in the audience about to win her Emmy.
I mean, you can't argue with it, can you?
No, not really.
I love it. So, in your journey, from what I understand, your parents taught you drawing and painting, and they obviously had a large influence on your career.
Hmm.
How has that network and connection helped with your creative influence and the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks for asking me that question. I think In terms of my mum and my dad, they're very, very different people. As I said, my dad lived in Australia, my mum lived in South London. They were divorced, but they both were painters. They both were portrait painters. I think my mum taught me to work really thoroughly and really carefully and well. Like, just, I never think that people are born knowing how to work, right? Students, children, adults, practitioners, any, but we need to learn how to work. And I think my mum taught me
Interesting.
how to work. My dad taught me how to work quickly and efficiently. And I think that's really, really important when you're trying to energize work, because you can't, it's like working thoroughly doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like overwork something. And my dad
Mm.
was a very kind of like raw, gestural, visceral painter. And I think he taught me how to like work quickly, efficiently, throw down thoughts and kind of leave it alone. And so I think it was a really, really good combination in retrospect about
Yeah.
those two different influences on my creative process. Going further, I don't think, whilst that's a very privileged position to have two creative parents if you want to go into a
Mm.
creative industry, I don't really think they unlock doors in terms of professional advancement, because they were
No.
very kind of very much in a painting fine art world. And I think moving forward into design and three-dimensional design, it wasn't really something that they had a lot of connection with. That was kind of nice for them that I didn't become a painter. I think they were very proud of me that I was able to kind of forge my path in a creative field, but in a very different direction.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to me because I started my career in this industry because I was influenced by both of my parents who worked in either different parts of the industry as well in terms of marketing or administration and business ownership and those sorts of things. So
Yeah, yeah.
it is interesting how your upbringing has such an influence on where you find your creative path and what that is that it leads you to at the end of the day. And as you say, I don't think you often realize until it's retrospective, and you can sit back and you can see the path and the bit of Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs that have come
Yeah,
across to where you are, and you go, wow, that's where it all came from.
I suppose it's kind of also, I find it quite interesting at the moment. A lot of my friends' kids are teenagers, and a lot of my friends are artists and designers, but their kids are not really following artistic creative paths. And I kind of like, where's that come from? Because for me, it was sort of like a direction that I had. I could have gone and done something else, but really my heart lay in art and design. And I don't know how that happens, where both your parents are designers and then you want to go and study history or something. But it's happening.
It,
It's happening a lot, and it's fairly frequent. It's not just like the isolated
yeah.
case. So who knows how these things work?
I mean, I look at, there's obviously a big difference in what youth are sort of more interested in today than they aren't. And something that seems to be a trend for younger people is sustainability. And I
Mm.
know that that's something that you have a big passion for. Is that something that, when you're encouraging people to look at sustainable ways and utilize things like household items and bits and pieces in an art and creative process and to sort of take that ordinary to extraordinary, is that another opportunity to start engaging young people into realizing that there's a world of creativity right in front of them that they potentially haven't explored before?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a layer, and sustainability is such a broad topic. I think almost nobody at the moment who's designing stuff can ignore it. It's going to be part of
Mm.
every single part of the process of your idea, from right from the start to right to kind of cradle to grave um, sequence of sustainability, having an eye open to it at every single point, more so now than ever. And I think um, sustainability, whilst of course it's absolutely paramount because of climate crisis, I think it doesn't need to. weaken or dampen or make creativity more difficult. In fact, often I think that constraints make you more creative because
Mm.
it's a bit like a naughty child who's told not to do something. You find ways to do that thing, and I think if um, if sustainability factors at first seem like an impediment because you can't use a certain material or you have to use a certain amount of that material, I think in the end it probably makes you more creative. And there's lots of ways that you can kind of access that and start that process. For me, with the projects that I've done recently, and also maybe the one you were talking about with Grace, it was just about not buying anything. So, like I said, I think sustainability is super broad from the sourcing of materials to the use of materials, right the way through to consumerism, capitalism, and what you do with that. So, there's so many points there that we can touch on. But I think the project of Monoclo that maybe you're referring to that Grace
Yeah.
mentioned. I think that
Yeah,
was
it was
about like
amazing.
not buying anything,
Yeah.
and I'd run that project a lot of times, and previously at an art college where I worked, where we'd have a day where uh, we encourage students to dress head to toe in one fabric, and it could be color, it could be texture, it could be pattern, or material. Um, and if you didn't have the right piece, then you kind of there was a bulletin board where you could say, "Hey, I need some denim shoes. Help me out. Size 10, or I need a polka dot tie. Help me out with that." So there was what I thought would be really interesting was if 150 people came in head to toe just in one kind of block of material, pattern, color, texture. Um,
Yeah,
and
wow.
so that's kind of where it started, and it's kind of grown a little bit. But that was absolutely not about buying anything. It was about looking at what you already have and combining things together in a way that you wouldn't normally do that. And I suppose,
Yeah.
that obviously was going to tap into Grace Lamb's kind of core business as a stylist, where she's getting people to look differently at what they already have in their wardrobe.
Yeah, and Grace talked about that in our last episode, in fact, in terms of how she, she's found it quite difficult working with fashion houses where she's wanted them to integrate, their new season with existing fashion and things that exist totally. And the fashion houses just aren't interested in that concept at all. It's just all about the new, 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 new. And it's such
Mm.
a juxta in that, sort of way that someone in Grace's position as a stylist and there to create the new fashion, sort of thinking differently. So it'll be interesting to
Yeah,
see when
because
the fashion
yeah,
houses change with it,
yeah, right. Because I suppose the default position is new equals buy new, or new
Yeah,
equals like buy more. And I think exactly what you said. It's about rethinking those structures and thinking there's maybe another way that we can go about this. My
yeah,
just on that topic, my partner did something really interesting a few years ago. He didn't buy anything for a whole year. So he bought
wow.
food, but he went through the whole year from January the 1st to December 31st, not buying anything,
Wow.
not thinking about buying anything, not going shopping. And I think
Yeah.
that's like a really amazing sort of little experiment to do on yourself.
Yeah, and
Because I
how
think
did he
I think
go
that
with
really
that?
starts to rewire our brain because we start to just it's a bit like betting shops or you call them pokies, I think, right?
Yeah, yep.
In uh,
In
in
Australia?
in Australia. So I think like that's never on my radar. I just don't even look at them. It doesn't register. And I think that's just because I'm not interested in gambling. But I think if you are not buying anything, your brain is just freed up not to think about that, right? For that whole year because you're just thinking, well, I'm not buying anything, so I'm not going to look, I'm not going to think about it, I'm not going to be envious or crave anything or read, I just don't need that. And I think it's probably a kind of really super interesting kind of mental health exercise that you probably need to practice a little bit and then becomes a habit. And, it's a
Yeah.
different way of, I guess, being sustainable.
So was it like being on a fad diet that after the year, like, just went on a big spending spree on January 1, or was it now a sustained lifestyle choice and a shift in mental model?
Absolutely. He's just not like that. He's not.
Yeah.
I think it was just like a test to see whether he could
Mm.
do that for a whole year.
Yeah.
And
And
it,
as it continued with a minimization of spend and a
yeah,
different freedom mentally?
yeah, he's just not materialistic at all. And
Yeah.
I just think that's an incredible exercise to do.
Yeah, I would struggle. I love things. That's one of my biggest problems. I just love things. So,
Mm.
what an amazing experiment. I think it's absolutely
But
incredible.
I think there's a difference, right, between be. I think more interesting is not this thing of like uh, it's kind of he could have bought things. So I think this experiment is sort of more interesting than somebody that kind of doesn't have spending power. He has spending power. He just
Yeah,
chooses not to spend it on things
yeah,
for that period. Because we could all kind of get things by kind of going through rubbish bins, or I always pick stuff up on the street. But I guess in that model, that's kind of also not allowed because you're just not allowed anything. You know, you're not really
new.
allowed
Yeah.
anything. So not allowed, but
Wow.
kind of sounds a bit weird. But
Part of it.
I think just the buying thing, it's
Yeah,
kind of it's power, isn't it? It kind of it removes you from that sort of capitalist trap
yeah. And
at the same time being sustainable.
it's really interesting because we've talked to a lot of creatives throughout this last 2 seasons, and there seems to be this common thread about, like, creativity for good, where
Mm,
utilizing your creative thinking, using your creative abilities, whatever they are, not just for the commercial aspects and, we all have to live, but utilizing that at some point and to some degree, and varying admittingly, to do some good, to actually have an impact that has a positive outcome on things, and, that's a great example of it, and I'm sure, are there other examples where you feel, I mean, even the singular block color project, um, was that something as well in a pursuit for wanting to do, use some creativity for good to get people to really think differently in those items, Is that an important
yeah,
part of
yeah.
your
I mean,
process?
yeah, sure. I think the Monoclo project is definitely about reprogramming, rethinking how you do things. But I think separate to that, I've always been really interested in talking about art and design, making it accessible, making it easy for people to participate in, easy to understand. And as I said at the beginning, kind of demystifying it. And that might be whether I'm explaining what perspective is on television, on the BBC program, The Big Painting Challenge, or making a YouTube clip about how to reuse something, or how to work in a different way, or work with something that you already have, or just kind of collect something and display something. So I'm always looking for accessible ways to talk about in terms of art and design and to kind of help people be creative. And I think that is a slightly different mindset, but it's not completely different because it's kind of saying, okay, everybody has things in their house in a particular, everybody has, I don't know, let's say green things in their house. So what happens if you just put all the green things that you have on a table? Can you make a kind of museum of green on your table? And then
Yeah.
when you have that, it's again a little bit like the monoclo thing. You start to look together and you start to notice all those different types of green. But as an example, that's not really about the monoclo concept. What that's about is everybody has stuff wherever they live that are made of a particular material or a particular color that they can look at in a different way and bring together. So it's about trying to make that really, really accessible and trying to make a
Mm.
formula or a process whereby people can be creative in a really kind of simple, easy way.
I love it. It's such an interesting project to think about. I'm just now sitting here thinking in my own home if I started to pick a color or pick a texture and pull all
Mm.
those things together and not organize things in what's become the obvious logical that certain things live in a kitchen, certain things live in a bathroom, certain things live in a bedroom, in a lounge room. But to reorganize and have those things cataloged in our home by a different mechanism. I'm starting to envisage where I would
Mm.
put things or what things would suddenly come together that I'd never sort of pictured and seen in that way before. It's really
And
interesting.
also, look, I think that process can then be applied to other things. So, as I said, it could be about trying to understand perspective. And I think I was really inspired by my godson, who's at a very lovely school with like great art department, blah blah blah. And when he was probably in year 9, he showed me his art book, which had like perfect perspective, but he didn't really understand it. And that really inspired me to think, okay, so why is he not understanding it? You know, he's a clever boy. He's at a good school. He will have had it explained to him, but he doesn't really understand it. And I was then trying to look for ways. Okay, so perspective is something we all learn at school. Is there a way that I can then make that easier to understand? Is there a way that I can make that really accessible so that instead
Yeah.
of people superficially being able to like draw in perspective, they really understand what they're looking at? Because those things are kind of super difficult to communicate. And you can't, I think YouTube can be really great at that, where you can make now
Mhm.
movies about something where you can kind of move the camera around, you can draw on the screen, and so that it's not kind of in a book or somebody's drawing it
Yeah.
on a blackboard behind you. So I think looking for those things where I could see that people were struggling creativity with their creativity or struggling creatively, I was able to think that's a point where I can intervene, where I can change how people are change the process that they're working with and try and make that a bit better.
Incredible. I mean, you've obviously been lecturing for a long time, and I know that's coming to a bit of an end sooner rather than later, by the sound of things, which you look pretty excited about. I mean,
Yeah, I'm so happy about
you've
that.
written a book, you've starred in a reality TV series. I mean, it's hard to imagine that there's anything you wouldn't tackle. So, what's the next thrilling project for Pascal, and what are you most excited about next?
That's actually quite a difficult question to answer. I've had a really hard
That's
five
why I
years.
asked it.
Right. I think we go through periods of our life where we feel really creative and we feel really uncreative. The past 5 years on the subject of creativity have been really stressful for me. Both my parents died. I've had a terrible job. I've been doing a house renovation, which is never any fun.
Oh,
Lots of bureaucracy to do with that. And I think when you're relaxed, you can be really creative. And
yeah.
when you've got like full bandwidth going on with lots of other things, it's really, really hard to be creative. I've really noticed that creativity comes when your brain is relaxed and you allow it to go on a journey, not being distracted, every second about an email, about probate, about what are you going to do next week, with something that you kind of don't want to deal with, or
Yeah.
a leak or something like that. And I think, thankfully, that period is coming to a close, and I'm going to really enjoy going back to what I really love doing, which is being an artist, a designer, and being creative, and allowing myself just to develop a little bit more, because for the past 5 years, almost to the day, I've been on this kind of break of creativity just because of like bad
Yeah.
things happening.
Well, I'm glad to hear that's coming to an end. Have you got a project in mind for next, or you're sort of waiting for the next wave to come in so that you can ride that
No,
in with something new
I,
and
I
interesting?
I think what I'd like to do, and I think we've kind of touched on this, is I figured from September I'm just going to focus on that monoclone project and just do that for a
Yeah.
whole year and see where that takes me, because I feel like I do one thing and then I'm on to the next thing, and I haven't kind of let that previous thing had a chance to kind of fully evolve. So I want to focus from my own work on that, not to do with clothes necessarily, but on that idea of um, reunifying something that already exists, or multiple things that already exist, or bringing something together through that kind of similar process. And I thought I would start that in September, not work on anything else, and see how far I can take that in a year. I think that also narrows down my vision a little bit in terms of just working on one thing. So I want to experiment and see whether my temperament will handle that for a whole year.
Wow. And is that something that you think lots of people are gonna be able to become involved in? Is something that you see, happening, across the globe, or are you gonna do it in quite an isolated, one-on-one style
I,
environment?
I have no agenda for it, to be honest. I think there has been various points in my life where I've wanted to do something just because I wanted to do it. You mentioned the book Ordinary Made Extraordinary. That's published
Yeah.
by the biggest publisher in the world, Penguin Random House. I don't like writing and I don't really like reading, but I made some YouTube videos in starting in sort of 2011. And then an agent contacted me and said, "We need to make a book of this." But when I was making the YouTube videos, that was not on my radar at all. I just wanted to make some
Yeah.
little films because I enjoy telling design stories through small films. That then led on to me making the book. But there wasn't an agenda of me thinking, if I do this, then this will happen, because pretty
Yeah.
much that never happens. So I think I just need to approach this fairly wide-eyed, thinking I'm just going to see how far I can take this. And if people are interested, fine. If they're not, then I'm not going to have wasted my time.
I love that. Look, before we finish off, we do a little thing on in season 2 called the Fast Five. It's just a fun 5 questions, kind of one word sort of answers. Hopefully, it doesn't sound too onerous or difficult. So, are you up for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love those things, but I hate them when people give like 10-word answers. So I'm going to try really hard and just give you a one-word answer.
Awesome. We'll make it as difficult as possible then. Let's
You
let's
can
start off.
escalate from 1 to 5.
Yeah. Um, favorite colored onesie?
Mango.
Mango. Oh, I like this. I like this. Um, teaching or creating?
Oh, creating.
That was an easy one. Um,
They're not
a-
difficult.
and, and simply because of where you're coming from, jam or marmalade?
Marmalade.
I thought that was coming. Little more challenging this time. 2D or 3D
Oh,
design?
3D. 3D. Always. Since birth. Since my first breath.
It wasn't as hard as you thought, was it? I thought, considering your portfolio, there's so much
You could have
dimension
gone
and
England
texture.
or Australia.
Oh, well, I didn't,
Well,
you
that
know.
would have been really tough.
Well, I'll finish with one that might be just as
Oh, go
tough.
on.
I'm not sure. Um, Prince William or Prince Harry?
Oh, Prince Harry. That's again,
Not a monarchist at all.
not really, but yeah. Hmm.
I can imagine at the
One of
moment
my
it's a bit
students'
meh.
brothers played Prince Harry in The Crown,
Oh,
which
really?
was yeah, it was really fun to see because the brothers look quite similar, and so yeah, it was really funny to see August's brother playing Prince Harry in that, that last season. I had two friends actually another friend of mine played Martin Bashir in The Crown, so it was really fun to see people that you know in that.
Yeah. Do you I have some bizarre experiences in my life where I know people and then they end up in very famous settings, and it's
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of it's weird to see that person that you know on a different level, them being this other person. The best example I can give you is I had the privilege of hanging out for a couple of days with this guy called Gary, just Gaz, and I didn't know Gaz from anybody. He was just one of the boys hanging out we're at a racetrack actually, and it was on the last night that I found out that it was Gary Beers, the same Gary Beers that is the bass player for INXS. And I've been hanging out with the bass player from INXS for a whole weekend.
That's the
And then
best
when I
way,
went
isn't
and
it?
watched it, then I watched a concert, and it was very bizarre to see Gaz on stage because I just knew Gaz as this guy that we went to the races and hung out for a weekend, and now he was on stage as one of the biggest, Aussie rock
You know,
bands,
I'm sure
ever.
he probably appreciated that more than you did.
He did actually. He said,
You
"I've
know, he
loved the
probably
fact that you had
appreciated your
no idea who
friendship.
I was."
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah, because
exactly.
I just enjoyed hanging out with him, and we didn't talk about that sort of, like, other
Yeah,
bits of
yeah.
life until the very end. So, yeah, he thought that was fabulous. He says, "It's been so great hanging out with someone that just treated me like a person." I was like, "Yeah, well,
I
you
suppose
know."
I suppose what I'm saying is the other way around. Is like it's great when your friends do well, and when you kind
Yeah,
of see people that you know kind of really hit the big time, or are propelled into something that everybody's looking at or everybody knows about. It's just
yeah.
it brings me so much joy.
Awesome, awesome. I love that. Well, look, Pascal, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a
Oh, you're
pleasure to
very
speak
welcome.
with you, mate. That's all we've got time for on this episode of Creative Glue, but please join us each month as we continue to explore the creative glue that brings us all together. And if you haven't already, check out the rest of the Creative Glue episodes available on our YouTube channel, Spotify, or Apple Podcast. Simply search Creative Glue Podcast to find us. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned to see who will be joining us next on Creative Glue.
Your ideas and my ideas will stick together like glue. 'Cause we've got